I wanted to take a minute and kind of show you guys some of the things we're doing around the email processing. We've had oftentimes clients will call us and say, "Hey, someone sent us an email and it didn't get processed. There's something wrong with your system." So we're trying to address this kind of question that always seems to be coming up. So what I've done is I've gone in here and we've made some changes around the mail reader and around some of the kind of setup options around inbound processing. So what you're going to be able to do is turn around and say, okay, anything that's coming through this email address, we want to do a diagnostic trace on it. So someone could technically just leave this on all the time, and it's kind of like an audit trail, if you will. So what you'll do is, for example, we'll come in here and we'll take a look at the email address, and I'll just show you where these options are. So now in the newer UI, you're going to see this diagnostics tab. And what you'll be able to do is come in here and turn on diagnostic recording and diagnostic forwarding of the full email address to the administrator. Now, this is a little bit different than the alerts. The alerts are really kind of letting them know, hey, something happened, there was an error of some sort. This is real diagnostic level. So when an inbound email comes in, if we're recording the information, we're going to record all the stuff about the email, when we got it, what they thought it was, like if it was a new request or KB search or whatever it was. We're going to record that in a table so that we can view this after the fact. We'll also be able to see the diagnostic information associated with that. So that's one side as to just recording the diagnostic kind of information. And you can see here, it allows you to keep a log of the emails, that were received by the system and what the system did with them. So if it came in as a new request and it turned out because of it came in very short to the last time they created a request, it could turn into a request update because of the feature we have in there. So there's the diagnostic recording, and then there's the forwarding of the actual email. So if you look at the forwarding side of it, what it's going to basically say is when we get an inbound email, we're going to take that message, even after we've processed it, we're actually forward a copy of it to the administrator, and we're going to put a bunch of diagnostic information at the top of it. So if you really want the gory details, you'd basically use both of these options. I've set this up so you could have both or either or. So, depending on the situation you might be in, it just gives us a bit of flexibility. In the case of the forwarded message, it's the whole thing, like whatever content the message had, attachments, all that sort of stuff, it gets forwarded there. You'll see in a minute when we start looking at the actual message that gets sent, there's some diagnostic information in it. So if we were to quickly go over and take a look at a message that got sent. So you can see here, it went to my incident management. Now this came off our test server, if you will. So you can see it's got the diagnostic number in here. That is actually a key that you would search into the system by that. The date and time, and then what the target email was, who the sender was, what the CC was, who the IM person was. So the system does all that stuff that it does in the mail reader to look stuff up. It's going to turn around and record this in the diagnostic block. Also in here, you can see the transaction type requested was a new request created. The action taken was a new request. So it'll give you both. So if it comes in as maybe they think it's a new request, but because we're looking at that subject line kind of comparison, it could turn around and be an actual request update. So it'll tell you what it actually did. In this case, if it was a new request, you can see it's got the assigned project ID and the request number, and also the actual request number like we would know it as. The notes in here, new request successfully created, these are the things that kind of comes out of the mail reader. So it'll just be a brief statement as far as, what happened. So if there's any other additional information in there, like maybe it's a KB query and there was results, it'll give us that kind of information in there. So that block is what I add to the actual message when I forward it on to them. The context of this is they can take this diagnostic number, quickly go back into the interface and search it and find the actual log entry that's associated with it, or vice versa. Also note in here when the message gets forwarded to the administrator, as in this case, admin@company.com, it'll have the original kind of some issue, new request created, and then a diagnostic trace. So that's a tag that I put in there to kind of let them know that this is just informational for you guys. It's not anything to do with the system. Okay. And then if you scroll down, you can actually see the original message, and it was just some basic stuff, test item in here. But anything would go in here, email attachments and so forth. Okay. So when you're kind of monkeying around with these settings, that's going to dictate. So the recording of the diagnostic, if that's all you did, you're going to see this window I'm going to show you in a second. If you had the diagnostic forwarding, you're going to see the email that we just saw a second ago. Okay, so you'll turn those on. It's done at an email address kind of level. Okay, and then when you're in here, what I've basically done is there's a couple of different ways to get to the log. So one is if you're actually looking at an address, let's say this particular guy, and you went down here and you went to the email log, this will actually launch the window and actually go and set up and do the search for you. So I'm actually passing the actual target email address of that particular entry into this thing. So that'll let you look specifically at a particular email address, but you can now go in here and query by anything. So if we went in here and said, you know what, search for anything that starts with S, it'll go find you all of the target email addresses that had S in them. Okay, so I'm doing kind of a like clause in here. So if it's got an S in it, it'll show it so you can see all the entries. So these are entries that were actually processed. Now, when you're looking at the entry, you can see it's got the diagnostic ID. So remember, we saw in the message, that's your quick way to search in here. And I'm going to show you that search in a minute. The log date time, what server processed it. This is just test data, so don't pay too much attention to that. The target email address, who the sender was, who the CC was, what the subject line was. And then if you keep going over here, you can see like what action. So you see it was new request, the person's name, their actual request number if it was associated with an update or a request of some sort. You can see the action taken. You can see the action notes. And then you can see here whether or not the admin email address was set at the time. So you'll know that they got a copy of it. And then whether or not we're sending. In this particular case, I've got this test data set to no, but more than likely you're going to have yes. And I put the project in here. Now, when you're looking at this data, I squish it all up in its kind of format just to let you kind of quickly look through it and find what you need. If you go down here and click the toggle data view, it'll then give you the blown out view because remember all that diagnostic information, that's kind of more of what you're interested in looking at. That's probably the option you're going to use. Okay, so you can kind of control the view a bit. So when we went in from an email address into this particular window, that's how it goes by default, and then you can start tweaking these things. So for example, if I want to clear all the criteria and then just go in here and say, hey, you know what, I want to do a date range, and that's all we're going to supply, we'll let it execute the search and it'll show you everything on that date range. Now, one thing about the date range, if you've only supplied a date range, there is a limiter. So I think I limited it to about a year right now, but I mean, that's kind of flexible, but that's done so they can't go into a huge mailbox and just say, yeah, give me 50,000 rows, because that's going to be an issue, right? Also, when you're in here doing the date range, by default, I look at the current date time and I go back, I think it's 2 weeks by default, and you can see that when you came in here. But you can certainly change this however you see fit. If you check the use current date and time, every time you execute this, it's going to be moving that kind of end date time. Okay. If you want to statically put in a thing, you would turn around and uncheck this, and then you'd put in whatever range you want. So if you want to look maybe a year ago or whatever have you. As far as the searching, any of the email address, sender, target, CC, you can search by the subject. Okay, and again, these are all wildcards, so whatever portion you put in there and do the match. If you're doing the name search and you do an IncidentMonitor person, it'll let you do the contact search. Ultimately, what it's going to do is it's going to basically put the first name and last name because that's what we're searching by. Or you can just say no email from the name from the email, and that's the display name out of the email message itself. By project, if you want to just look at a specific project, you'd select that. If you're doing it by request number, again, this is very akin to what we were doing before with the request search. So let's say it's ING 3464. It'll let you basically do this, and then the search that you do will basically be done by that. Okay. And then lastly, there's a couple things down below here by diagnostic number. So that's the message. So if someone got that forwarded message and it's got the diagnostic ID in it, they can go back in here and kind of look at it to see more details about it. Okay. And then once you actually find something, now you can operate in here. So the reset criteria is obviously just clear everything back to normal. If you notice, once I selected something, it allows me to export it or delete it. Okay, so if you were to multi-select a bunch of these things and you want to delete them, you can certainly do it. If you want to export them, you certainly can. So this kind of allows them to kind of maybe, save that data out to a file, for reference or copy it for meetings or whatever have you. Okay, so that's kind of some of the features you can do in here. We can also pin it. So by pinning it, it just gives you more space so you can look at data, because you're probably going to be going through a lot of data at this particular kind of point in time. So that's how you can turn around and see that sort of data. So pretty much the things you're going to use when you're in here is like the toggling of the view, because if you need to see a lot of the kind of blown out data like this stuff, and this was all kind of separate lines where all that data was on, you can see the email message was discarded to a size larger than 10 meg. So you can see all the diagnostic stuff that would be of interest. So we can now go in here, and if someone says, hey, I sent an email, oh, when did you send it? So we can find it by date range, or if they gave us a name or an email address, we can certainly find the entries. Once we find those entries, we can now look at it and figure out exactly what the system did with it. There's no getting around this. So in the mail reader, if you have this option on, this diagnostic information is recorded in a database table. Okay. The one thing we didn't decide to put into this is we didn't kind of take the whole email message and store it as an attachment or something like that, because with the CDONS library, we don't have access to the whole message. So it's a little bit hard to do that sort of stuff. So that's why we kind of took the approach of, hey, we'll allow you to forward it to administrative address, so you can always kind of find it bidirectionally. Like if I go with that message, I can come in here and find it, or go from here and go find the message. So it just gives you the kind of best of both worlds. Okay. So the main thing to know when you launch this window and you go into it, by first it'll be using whatever this address is that you're on, but then you can certainly go and override that. Like, so you can see in this case it found a couple of entries. Then you'd probably do like reset. So I want to clear it, and then maybe I want to go and find a particular sender's address, and I could kind of put that in here. So if we looked for a sender address that started with Bruce, we'd probably go in here and do a search like that, and then you can see all the senders' names are Bruce. Okay, so this is something that will be embedded. We might try and squeeze it in. I think the 9.7.5 release or 5.0 release is done, so this would probably be an additive thing after that. But I think it'll go a long way to addressing all these issues of the mysterious email messages disappearing, when in reality something happened with them. We forwarded it to the admin, and it probably got cleared, or nobody's checking the actual admin address. Okay, so in a nutshell, that's kind of gone on with the email log. Internally I call it email diagnostics, just for our own reference, but that's kind of what's going on with that.